Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Way of Life. I'm your host, Gus Holland. Today we have my friend Santiago from high school. You want to tell everybody hi and about yourself?
Hey everybody, I'm really excited to be here with Gus. My name's Santiago Capetillo. I'm a registered dietitian, nutritionist. I own my own business and I have over 5 or 6 years of experience working at an inpatient setting. My business is called Renegade RD. It's a virtual based business where we can see clients online. And we did that so to cut costs and to explore a bigger audience than what we would be just at a traditional office. So we have a lot of extended hours to accommodate.
Oh, hey, your audio cut out.
All
Okay,
right,
yeah, it's back. It's back.
all right, sorry about that, man.
No, you're good. Last thing I heard was about your extended hours.
Yeah, so we have extended hours to accommodate those that like work a 9 to 5 that can't go to a physical office. So that's where the virtual really comes in handy.
Okay, sweet. Um, so just for those that like I know what a dietitian is, but just for those listening that maybe have heard of it but don't know what it is, could you kind of elaborate on further on what you do and what kind of people you help?
Yeah. So traditionally, well, let's begin with what a registered dietitian is. So in order to be a dietitian, you need a 4 year degree. There's 2 or 3 routes in which you can go, but the route I took was I got a 4 year degree from Texas A&M. From that, you have to either do a master's or do an internship. With that said, that internship consists of like 3,000 hours of contact hours. So you see anything from like sports at the collegiate level all the way to like ICU patients. So there's a lot of stuff that you see, and our background is really, really broad, which allows us to work in different industries. So I have friends that are the dietitian for like the Dallas Cowboys. I have some that are just managers for the hospital, the dining services. So we have a really broad um, career essentially. And so once you do your internship, you're eligible to sit for the RD exam. And so what distinguishes a dietitian between like a nutritionist, because there's a lot of nutritionist certifications out there, but the RD title is licensed and protected by a governing agency, and so you have to pass the exam. You have to meet all the pre-qualifications to hold the title RD, and so um, it's protected because we're kind of like the nutrition expert when it comes into like the medical field, and so if a doctor has a nutrition question, they want a reliable source, and that's kind of where we step in.
Okay, sweet. That's good to know. um so as far as you said you did like 3,000 contact hours, is that
Mhm.
correct? So I know it's pretty broad, but did you have like something that you primarily did? Was it mainly like hospitals or?
Yeah, so my internship was through Texas Tech out in West Texas. So primarily most of my hours were hospital based, and so I did a lot of I worked at a level 2 trauma in Odessa, and so most of the patients that we saw anywhere between like diabetes, hypertension, heart failure, and then that like the last 4 weeks of your like hospital rotations, you see ICU. That's all you see. So being at a level 2, you saw a lot of car wrecks, gunshot wounds, and then once you're doing your ICU rotations, you have to pick out a one patient that you do a case study on, and so you follow them from like the beginning all the way to like when they discharge, and so and then you present that to dietitians, doctors, all that good all that personnel, and so it's really intensive while you're in the hospital setting, and so my background primarily is in a hospital setting, and so what my business aims to do is bring the expertise down to it's to make it more accessible to everyone, and so um, it's more focused on the consulting aspect, and like that personal that one-to-one training with the individual versus like the inpatient. So in the inpatient side, you also educate people, but it's not the education that you think of, because you have nurses coming in, you have therapists coming in, you have doctors coming in. So sometimes we're able to squeeze in like a 20-30 minute conversation with them, about like diabetes or their heart failure. And so the patient, I think, doesn't get the full benefit of our education because we're only there for like 20-30 minutes at a time, and so we don't get to implement like the changes that we want. And so most of the time what we see is these patients are too sick to really care about like their diabetes. And so their main goal is to try to get better so that they can go home to their family, and so which is understandable. But me as a dietitian, I think that conversation needs to be had. How can we improve those health outcomes, once you're back home? And so that's what I'm trying to establish, is a connection that merges that gap.
Okay, sweet. That's basically allow you to do more follow through with the patient instead of just sending them on their way.
Yeah, man. So what basically you don't have that follow through in the hospital setting, but beyond that, professionally you don't get to really make those interventions that you want to implement. So kind of in the hospital saying, you like, here's a handout, this is what you should be doing, and that's pretty much the extent of it. Versus like when you're working with me, I sit down, I take your history, your barriers to change, how motivated you are, like what your attainable goals are, and I give you a plan so that you can reach those goals. And so there's a lot of I don't want to say tricks, but there's a lot of interventions that we can do to get you to those goals.
Okay, okay. Um, so basically, like for example, if someone's diagnosed with diabetes, or whether it be stage 1 or stage 2, you sit down with them, give them a consultation, and uh kind of explain what their new disease is basically, and how to live with it basically, and maybe have a better quality of life, I guess, would you say?
Yeah, so diabetes is good. So diabetes can be broken up into like three main categories.
Mm,
And so you have pre-diabetes, you have type 1 and type 2. So as a health professional, where you really want to catch people is the pre-diabetes stage. That's where you can really make changes, and so that's where you prevent the disease. And so um, physicians use that term to kind of warn people on towards the path that they're going. There's a lot of things that we can't control. So like, especially with diabetes, a lot of it has to do with genetics. And there's a lot of stuff about genetics that we don't really understand yet. Um, but if you have a history, like if your parents are diabetic, especially your mom, odds are at some point in your life you're gonna have a carbohydrate metabolism issue, which can lead to diabetes. And so pre-diabetes is where you really want to tackle it. And that's where the gold standard is lifestyle modification. Most physicians, that's what they want to see, but unfortunately most physicians do not have the time, especially like in our healthcare system. They don't have the time to sit with you like for 30-40 minutes out of their day to say, you know um, this is what you should be eating, this is how you should be exercising. So that's kind of where I step in. I come in and I do have that allotted time, to tell you, this is how you should be exercising, this is what you should be eating. And so with diabetes, the main goal is reducing the amount of carbohydrates, not just total sugar. So um, I know out there's a lot of I'd say advertising, especially in the food market, that this is sugar free, this is diabetic friendly. But a cookie's a cookie.
yeah.
Um, Sometimes they may not use sugar to sweeten it, but the breading, all that stuff is still a carbohydrates. And so Um, I teach patients how to read their labels, and so that they can make informed decisions. And so the same way that like an athlete or like a weekend warrior that really wants to focus on their fitness, in the same way that they're counting macronutrients to reach their goals is kind of what um, how I can help patients with diabetes count their own macros for their own needs. And so and that's kind of why our career is so interlocked. We see anywhere between athletes and to patients. So the concepts of nutrition are fundamental, I think, to everyone.
Okay. Sweet. Yeah. Um, Now, before we leave the diabetic talk, could you describe? I understand pre-diabetic is the stage, kind of like a warning type phrase. Type 1 and type 2 diabetes. Could you explain the differences between those real quick?
Yeah. So with pre-diabetes, there's there's several ways to diagnose it, but the traditional route um, is to pull a lab that's called an A1C.
Mm,
Um, so the A1C is a 3 month lab that measures. So when you have diabetes or you're pre-diabetic, we understand that you have either a genetic predisposition or something is going on where you're not metabolizing glucose right, and so it's ending up in the bloodstream. And so we use glucose for pretty much everything. So your brain primarily only uses glucose. It's the only source that it likes. So whenever you eat something, like let's say you eat a cheeseburger, that cheeseburger is broken down into macros: fats, carbs, and protein. Um, so the carbs end up being used by the brain and other organs, and what's left over is either stored as fat or doesn't get absorbed for energy and ends up in the bloodstream. And so when it's in the bloodstream, it kind of coats the red blood cells, and so it glycates them. And so the A1C measures how much glucose has been glycated to that red blood cell, and so that gives you a number between like 1 to like 20. And so if you're under 5.6, you're normal. If you're 5.7 to 6.4, you're pre-diabetic, and if you're 6.5 and higher, you're diabetic.
okay. Okay.
Okay, so that's how you diagnose diabetes, and then diabetes is broken down into type 1 and type 2. So in the past, we used to think that type 1 was primarily for kids. It's So type 1, the definition is essentially there's no insulin. So insulin is a hormone that tells your body to to absorb or utilize glucose. And so if you don't have that, or you're just not producing enough of it, there's no way to send that signal to your cells to absorb glucose, so it ends up in your bloodstream. And
Mm,
so primarily we saw that in adolescents, kids. And so, which now we have like late onset type 1 diabetes, but that's a different conversation. And then type 2 is primarily what we see in the United States. It's either lifestyle choices, genetics, um, diets that are high sugar, high carb, that leads to type 2 diabetes. And so basically, it creates insulin resistance where the patient has enough insulin or is overproducing insulin. Their body is just not recognizing that signal to absorb glucose. And so they end up with higher levels of glucose in their bloodstream, which leads to more glycated red blood cells, which leads to a higher A1C. And so, pretty much, if your A1C is above 10, which typically is the case with those patients that are undiagnosed, it leads to kidney failure, heart failure, amputations, loss of eyesight, just a lot of nasty complications. And type 2 is actually like the top one of the top three reasons for end stage renal disease because
Mm.
um, all that glucose has to be filtered through the kidneys, and so if it's unchecked or it's not controlled, it can really cause a lot of damage.
Yeah. Yeah. I've met a few people that have needed to, um, I don't know if it's super common, but they had to have their foot amputated. So that's
I know it's not funny, but um, when when you work in a hospital as an intern,
mm,
you think of like what are the most common things that you see, but limbs being amputated is one of the things that you just see like as a common thing.
mm,
Um, it's a common, and unfortunately, it's usually because of diabetes or a complication of it.
mm, yeah. Okay. Well, so besides diabetes, I know we were on that for a little while, and I know you handle a lot of different health conditions. You had mentioned that you cover a wide range of heart issues as well. Is that?
Yeah. So when I was an intern, which you see a lot of heart issues in the hospital, and so you could say that I cover heart failure, which encompasses different things, but primarily where my experience with heart issues is either in the ICU when patients had a heart attack and they ended up on the vent.
Mhm,
We had to manage their feedings, um, or it was like via cardiac rehab, um, or I or the rehab center I used to work at. And so, with that said, typically what you see is either chronic heart failure, coronary artery disease, or atherosclerosis. And so, all of that can be affected through your diet as well. So with heart failure, chronic heart failure, that was not so much affected by your diet does play a role into it, but typically what you see that is like in older patients that are like anywhere between like 70 to like 90, um, and typically I mean their heart is just tired.
yeah.
That's the most simple way to say it is that they're just a little bit older. Their heart's kind of wearing down, and so they're having issues. They're having edema, which is swelling. They're having, either high blood pressure or low blood pressure, and so the doctor helps with that. And so my role with that is basically helping them get the nutrition that's going to help them keep their heart nice and healthy. And so the way to do that is reducing the overall fat in their diet, and
Mhm,
then reducing the sodium, because if you have too much sodium and you're already having that swelling, that sodium causes you to swell even further.
mhm,
um, and then the types of fats that you consume also play a role in like your heart health. So if you're eating a lot of like fried food, fast food, processed food, that has a lot of saturated fats, which clog up your arteries, increase your blood pressure, all that good stuff. Versus like if you're eating a lot of like vegetable oils, like olive oil, avocado oil, or just getting those sources of like omega 3s from salmon.
mhm,
Those actually play a protective role in your heart, and so we teach patients how to do that. But what we saw in West Texas, and the big push in West Texas, was for a plant-based diet. And so there's also that documentary on Netflix, where they take a lot of NFL players and they put them on a plant-based diet and they track them for like 3 months, and they see how much their um, cardiac labs have improved. And
mhm,
so there's a lot of research behind that right now, and it's a hot topic, but it's one of those things that you have to be really motivated to get into because you're basically becoming vegan. So you're cutting out all meats, milk, dairy products, and going completely plant based. And so we've seen a lot of great success. We've had patients that lower their A1C if they're diabetic.
mhm,
Um, you know, it it's it protects their heart. It reduces a lot of their cardiac labs, but it's one of those things that you have to be committed 100%. And unfortunately, in West Texas, there's not a lot of resources to help that change. But
Hmm.
uh, currently, like if you're in the north, like New York, Chicago, they have other restaurants and have the other resources where that diet may be a little bit better. We had to go to training in California, and so California was very successful, but
Yeah,
West
Texas.
Texas.
Yeah, it's like cattle farms everywhere.
Yeah.
Um, so I guess on the opposite end of that spectrum, have you done any type of study or research into the like the carnivore diet or maybe like protein focused diets, I guess? Would you say?
So I have the one that I studied is the keto diet because a lot of diabetic patients tried the keto diet, and
Hmm.
so unfortunately we don't really recommend the keto diet for diabetics. And the carnivore diet, if you already have cardiac issues or you have like a history of heart failure, or if it runs in your family, it's probably not the best idea because you're putting yourself at risk for
Hmm.
those. Like we understand that red meat and meat in general raises your cardiac labs. It raises your cholesterol. They're typically higher in saturated fats.
Hmm.
Um, can it be advantageous for short term? And the same thing with like the keto diet. The keto diet was developed for epileptic kids. It was never developed as a as a long term diet to follow, and it's not a diet that we really push hard.
Hmm.
What typically happens with like the carnivore diet, the keto diet, and a lot of these diets, they're called fad diets.
Hmm.
They're basically rebranded diets that have kind of come along the years, have stayed or have been implemented, and they get rebranded as something else. So, for example, like the keto diet is just a really, in layman's term, is just a knockoff Atkins diet.
Yeah.
Um, so it's low carb, high protein, high fat diet, and kind of the same thing with the carnivore diet. It's essentially, if all you're eating is meats and some vegetables sparingly, it's just another rebranded keto diet, in my opinion.
Hmm. Okay.
Um, and so, I think there needs to be a there is a between a medical diet, um, because and then a fad diet or a diet um, that people follow to attain different goals. So, like in your case, someone that's like an athlete or bodybuilding or doing a show,
Hmm.
Um, I can see where those diets can be advantageous, simply because if you need to be a little bit drier, you need to bulk in size, all of these things that may be useful for short term gains.
Hmm.
Uh, I think those diets can be implemented well. So, and that's kind of where the sports nutrition science comes in. Um, I do think they can be implemented in a way that can be safely um, done in order to reach a goal. But for long term use, I think you'd have a lot of health implications later on, especially on the carnivore diet.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's definitely understandable, especially with the high five. That's what I was concerned about. Like in from my experience, I've just because I work out so much and I work outside and all that, so like I've always felt better with a like a higher amount of protein, not like crazy high,
Mhm.
um, but yeah, I was always concerned about the excess in fat. So
So typically, and if you look at other people that do this professionally,
mhm.
um, you can have a pretty high protein diet, but
Mhm.
typically what people do is whenever they increase protein, they also increase fat.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
sometimes that's where they sometimes don't see the results on like on a primarily high protein diet because the sources that they're picking is also high fat. And so, um, really dialing in your macros if you're counting macros, or really looking at what those protein sources are is ideal. But beyond that, there's whenever you're like on the carnivore diet and when you're making those diets that are very exclusive to a lot
Mhm.
of items, you can run into things like diverticulitis, colon cancer, a lot of these issues, and so that you don't really think about. You think, on from a bodybuilding slash fitness level, what you see is the short term like weight loss and muscle gain, but um, unfortunately, all of that meat has to be digested and has to go through your GI tract, and so when you exclude like fruits and vegetables out of your diet, um, you exclude fiber, and so just the lack of fiber can help develop diverticulitis, and so I don't know if you're familiar with diverticulitis.
Heard of it. I've never met anybody that's ever or had it or spoken with anyone, but um yeah, if you could explain what it is, that'd be helpful for sure.
Yeah, so diverticulitis, it's basically, let me start by saying this. Typically, we saw diverticulitis in older patients. Traditionally, it was patients that were 50 and higher.
Hmm.
Um, but now, um, I can personally say that I've seen patients as young as in their 20s. Um, so basically, what happens is your GI tract has a lining, and so when that lining weakens due to like chronic constipation or just lack of motility,
Hmm.
motility is movement. So just because there's not a lot of movement in your GI tract, it tends to like bulge it, and it weakens that lining, and it creates these pockets, and these pockets are called diverticuli. And so diverticulitis is the inflammation of those pockets. And
Okay.
so the only way to really know if you have diverticulitis or if you have diverticuli is to get like a colonoscopy and be
Hmm.
seen by a doctor. Um, or if you have like a flare up and they do other tests on you. But what happens is these pockets become inflamed and can sometimes even create abscesses. And so they have to be treated with antibiotics. But I've heard, um, just from patients I've seen at the hospital, is that it's very painful.
Hmm.
It feels like someone is stabbing them. And so um, when you have that and you're at the hospital, you may need antibiotics, IV antibiotics. They may actually need to go in and cut out those segments
Hmm.
that are weakened, and so you get um, a basically a bowel surgery. They cut out those pieces, reattach, and then or you may need like a colostomy bag if
Hmm.
it's severe enough. There's just a lot of complications, but typically, like I said, we've been starting to see patients that are significantly younger, and I
Hmm.
think I think it's because of our one, it's our busy lifestyles. I think in West Texas, we saw it a lot because the oil fields, guys that are our age,
Hmm.
working 50, 60 hours. A lot of what they do is on the road. And so they're eating stuff like gas station meals, gas station pizzas, McDonald's, fast food, like every single day for like a few months at a time,
Hmm.
like just wrecks their GI tract and their metabolism. And so a lot of the guys that we saw out there is just a lack of nutrition, and then just access to care out there that really created issues for them. And so, yeah, that's what diverticulitis is. And unfortunately, I think with the carnivore diet, if someone was to follow like a carnivore diet from like, I'd say like when they're 18 all the way to like, I'd say like mid 30s, I think they would have a lot of GI issues moving forward.
Okay.
In my
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Um, Now, you mentioned gut health, so that's been like a pretty trendy thing, especially I would say pre-COVID. Is there like if you're just hypothetically, if you're having a pretty well balanced diet, you're pretty good on your exercise and stuff like that, is it necessary or beneficial to like supplement with pro or prebiotic supplements?
Um, yeah, I definitely think there's a benefit to it. One, if you're supplementing it with so do you know the difference between a prebiotic and a probiotic?
Not off the top of my head. I've read up on it, but no.
So basically, a prebiotic is the food source for the probiotic. So it's basically something that they're going to metabolize and give you a benefit out of it.
Okay.
So
So would that be
uh,
like fiber,
yeah,
maybe?
it'd be like fiber. So for example, we naturally have bacteria in our colon that digest fiber and things that we can't digest into vitamin K.
Okay.
So you're getting that benefit from that. But I'd say the main takeaway, and this is where I say it's so important. It is something that's very important, is because in the hospital, if you have a patient that doesn't take this on a regular on basis, that they don't really take into consideration their gut health, there's some nasty bacteria that will overtake while you're in the hospital and will wreak havoc on your GI tract. So, C. diff and H. pylori are
Mm.
two bacteria that, if you're not taking care of your gut health, will absolutely wreck it. So my brother was actually diagnosed with H. pylori, and he's 19 right now. And so, not to say that he ate like crap or just didn't take into consideration. What happened with him is during COVID, uh, they didn't really know when COVID was still very early. They didn't really know like what it was, so
Mm.
they kind of misdiagnosed him with several things. And he was kind of one of the few patients that would test negative, that would give false negatives. And so after being tested many times, the doctors thought it was like an upper respiratory, and then they thought it was like a you know just a bacterial infection, and all these things led to him being prescribed like different antibiotics.
Mm-hmm.
And so that all those antibiotics kind of killed off the good bacteria in his gut, and it allowed that bad bacteria to really flourish. And so, if you don't take a prebiotic and a probiotic on a regular basis, and you're not following, I'd say, like a healthy diet, or you're not exercising, um, you're more prone to these infections if you were to ever be hospitalized.
Okay.
Um, but beyond that, too, like I said, like if you're not um, feeding or supplying the good bacteria into your gut, um, you can become deficient in some nutrients, like vitamin K. I do think, me personally, I do think that our gut biome plays a big role in like our mental health, like depression, our moods. Um, Basically, and I don't know how immersed you are in this topic, but there's books out there that there's people that study the gut biome a lot more than I do.
Mm.
But basically, some people are saying it's like our second brain,
Okay.
um, and so it really plays a huge role in our immune system, our like I said, our mental health. So I think it's very important. I do think that there's a distinguishing in the types of products that we push, and not to name a few things by like brand names, but um, things that are typically not uh, good sources like probiotics are like the kombuchas. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Unless you're fermenting it yourself, a lot of the carbonation will kill off like the good bacteria to begin with, and so you're not really getting, or the dose is too low. It's not, maybe that's a better word. Maybe the dose that you get from like the traditional like store bought kombuchas and stuff are typically too low to really make a significant factor. You'd have to be drinking them like very regularly.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, to really see any form of substantial like gain. Um, but kefir, like store bought kefir, is a great source.
Okay.
Um, um, any like oral um, probiotic is good.
Mhm.
The live ones are better.
Mhm.
But typically, if you have a diet that's rich in like dairy, lactobacillus is a bacteria that's found in dairy. So typically, if you're eating Greek yogurt or just any of those products, you're you're naturally consuming that. So typically, you don't really need to take one,
Okay. Okay.
if that makes
That's
sense.
interesting. Yeah, I know for when I was in high school that it, like, I mean, gut health, like that's not like a fad, but it does like kind of come in waves of popularity. And so I remember in high school there was a lot of people talking about supplementing with acidophilus and
Mhm.
stuff like that. So is that would that be something beneficial to do? I mean, if you say you weren't, say you're like lactose and you don't consume dairy and stuff like that, would that be a good route to go for that?
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm glad you mentioned that. So people that are lactose intolerant that typically exclude dairy, yeah, it's definitely something that I think is beneficial. I think, like I said, what's more beneficial is the dose and the consistency of it. So, if you do it every single day, I think you're going to see a greater benefit versus like the people that do it inconsistently. But I think that's with all supplements, whether that's like a probiotic that can be said about like creatine, that can be said about even a multivitamin. You're not going to get the full benefit of multivitamin. You're not going to be um, seeing those results until you do it consistently.
Okay, yeah. Now, speaking of multivitamins, if say you have like perfectly balanced diet, you're hitting, like, you track your macros and your micros, and you're hitting like almost 100% all the time on stuff. If you're supplementing, can like if you're supplementing with like a multivitamin or other supplements, it you can over supplement that, correct? Like maybe put too much on your kidneys or something like that. Is it?
Yeah, you could. So micronutrients. So macronutrients, whatever you don't use, you're gonna lose. So
Mhm.
um, that's why, especially in fitness, um, so let's say protein. Protein is probably one of the most popular supplements out there, right? Protein and
Mhm.
creatine. Creatine is one of the safest, most studied supplements when it comes to like sports nutrition. But I'd say besides that, protein is one of the most heavily used. So if you have like your average male or female that is working out a couple times a week, you can overdose. And overdose, I mean by like you can take in too much protein, but whatever you're not utilizing, your body's just gonna pee out.
Mhm.
So so you can go up to like 2, 3, 4 grams of protein per like kilogram or per pound. Your body's only really going to absorb anywhere between like 20 to 40 grams at a time. So if you're doing like 2 or 3 scoops of protein, um, a lot of it you're just going to urinate out. And
Mhm.
same thing with multivitamins. Um, the thing with micronutrients that's a little bit uh, different is that you have to take into consideration the bioavailability. So that's kind of what distinguishes us as from like someone that got like a nutrition certification, is that we understand things on the molecular level. So you have if you take a multivitamin every single day, the rate of absorption is is dependent on your genetically predisposed um, carriers, if that makes sense. So you
Okay.
have these pathways that carry these nutrients into your body. So, for example, like B12. So you can only uptake so much B12 um, per your genetics,
Hmm.
if that makes sense. So if you're overdoing B12, it's going to end up in your urine as well. Um, and so going back to the bioavailability, so like let's say B12 gets absorbed in the gut.
Hmm.
Um, so you have to have it's called intrinsic factor. It's found in the stomach. It's like a coenzyme that helps this vitamin get absorbed. So if you're on like if you have GERD, like reflux, and you're on a PPI, which is a proton pump inhibitor, or you just have like a lot of stomach acid, the the rate in which you're absorbing B12 can be affected. And so, even though you're taking a multivitamin, you can still be deficient in B12 because of either the medication or your genetic predisposition, because the bioavailability of what you're taking isn't sufficient. So in that route, you can work with like a dietitian or a physician to find a good alternative. So like a sublingual would be better. So you're bypassing that pathway so
Okay.
that you um, and so, with that said, going back to other micronutrients, so micronutrients can be broken down into water soluble, so things that are going to end up in your urine. So most vitamins, like all your B vitamins, are going to be found in that. But then you also have fat soluble, and those are a little tricky. Those can actually hurt you if you take too much of them.
Hmm.
Um, they get stored in your fat cells, and they can build up and cause toxicity.
Okay. Okay. Um, Hmm, that's interesting. Have you ever encountered someone with some form of like nutritional toxicity, like from a vitamin from fat soluble vitamins or
Typically, a fat soluble, like if you're taking a multivitamin, typically I'd say you're okay. They're
okay.
they're typically underdosed. It's where people I've seen it in one person. Um, it was like a mid-age woman.
Mhm.
Um, basically, she was doing all the things right. She was exercising. She was pretty fitness oriented. You know, she was trying to look good and feel good. For her age, and so you would think she was doing everything right. What got her in trouble is that she took the advice of her hairdresser and added a different supplement
Mhm.
that was primarily very heavy in zinc, and so it was the supplement itself. When she showed it to us, was like 500% of the recommended dose. Plus,
Okay.
she was taking a multivitamin. Plus, she was already her diet was probably already rich in zinc, and so she was doing this for like an extended amount of time. She did this for like years, and so it
Mhm.
finally caught up with her, and it led to like a metal toxicity,
Okay.
um, and it presented and basically the doctors were kind of they ran test after test after test, and we really couldn't find what was the issue. um, and so they finally asked her to bring all her medications, like someone bringing all her medications, all her supplements, and the pharmacist sat down and was like, "What's this?" And she was like, "Oh, I take that for my hair because my hairdresser a
Mhm.
couple years ago told me to add it because it would help with like uh, she would get her hair colored or something, and it would help like with the growth." And so
Mhm.
that's what it was recommended, and so uh, she got off of it. They basically detoxed her of that metal, and she went home. You know, it was
Mhm.
kind of simple as that. But I'd say like your average Joe, if you're taking like uh, a multivitamin, your diet's pretty well. You're not really gonna run into issues like that. There's a lot of factors that play into that, and so your body doesn't like to be at a homeostasis. So it has processes to get rid of these things so that you don't become sick. So it's very hard to kind of talk like overdo it when it comes to that.
Okay. Okay. That's good to know. Good to know. um, well, I think we've covered quite a bit today. before I let you go, I want to say thank you for doing this because you've provided a lot of information, but also I would like you to talk more about the company that you're running and go ahead and plug your socials or anything else that would further help the audience.
Yeah, so if any one of your listeners is interested in working with me, I want to extend and to help support the podcast as well and listeners as well. I want to create a promo code, which if they mention it anywhere, whether that's via phone, email, text, however they reach me at, so if they mention Whey 23 or if they're a listener of Way of Life, we'll give them a 30% discount. That's on all services. So, um, the initial, the follow ups, any of our subscriptions, they'll get 30% off. And then, so my business is Renegade RD. We're a virtual consulting business. And so, what I do is, if you have a question about diabetes, if you're, um, trying to improve your fitness, you can work with me. You get the initials are a 90-minute consultation. The follow-ups are 45. And then what you get out of that, you get the consultation. Then I give you a recap document, basically giving you that game plan that you and I, or me and the patient had developed, and it gives them step-by-step instructions on how to attain their goals. Um, and then they also get access to full scripts. And so full scripts is a basically a home dispensary for supplements. So I'm glad we covered a lot of like supplements and a lot of that. With that said, patients will can order their supplements directly from a dispensary, and so it's a protocol that I help develop with them, and they can help develop with their physician if need be. But it kind of excludes the middleman, and it gives them a better price and better quality supplements. And so if people are interested in working with me right now, the best way to get a hold of me is to either call or text. My number is 936-349-6546. And at the end of the month, our website is going live, and it's going to be www.therenegadeRD.com. And so on there, there's a form that they can fill out if they're interested in working with me, or they can email admin at therenegade.com. So either
Okay.
of those ways, they can get a hold of me.
Okay. Awesome. I'm gonna in the show notes, I'll put all of that information in there as well with the promo code. And whenever your website goes live, let me know, and I'm gonna be putting it on all the Instagram stories and everything. So
Okay, sweet man.
yeah.
Um, and then I have a spot for like my socials that I can add the podcast, and so um, um, you can be on the website as well.
Okay. Sweet. Yeah. This episode should go live on the 16th. So not this Wednesday, but next Wednesday.
Yeah. Are you still recording?
Yeah, I am, but I can stop it or edit anything out
Great.
or whatever.
So like I was mentioning before, if you wanted to do like a multi-series,
Mhm.
where we cover different things, I think sports nutrition is a big one, and I think